Yeah, we're live. 6:57, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Tonight we're going to talk about a couple things. One, I'm working on a video right now on small block Chevy performance. That's what got me thinking about turbo small block Chevy performance, because the question is, and we'll, maybe we'll do a poll later on because the polls seem to be very popular. The question is, has the small block Chevy all but been passed up in favor of the I want to say more modern LS, but now the LS is not modern anymore. The LT really is. And as we'll find when I go back and do more testing with the guys from Brian Tooley Racing, that you'll see the LT motor is better than the LS. Whether or not you can go get them from the wrecking yard and make them work and all that, but they make a lot of power. So as we, and not surprisingly, as we go from one generation to another generation to another generation, they should get better and better. And that's what we would expect, and that's exactly what's happened. But the small block Chevy was the darling of the performance industry for years and years and years. I think arguably until the small block Ford came out, the 5-liter Ford. I mean, they had the small block Ford out for a long time, but it never had the coverage and response from the aftermarket industry and coverage basically the way that the small block did, despite the fact that we had obviously lots and lots of Mustangs available, but everybody made intake manifolds and especially cylinder heads and stuff for the small block Chevy. Very few for the small block Ford until Ford ushered in the new 5-liter deal. And then then that industry just like blew up overnight, basically. But the small block Chevy is still a viable deal, and there's lots of them in the wrecking yards. In fact, you'll find a ton of them, and I see them all over in trucks and cars and all kinds of stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I see more of those in the wrecking yards than I do LS motors whenever I go there. So there's lots of small blocks still available. And the thing is, are they still a viable option for a lot of combinations? I have a thumbnail up of a turbo L98, very specific. But it goes to show you that even that motor, which basically is kind of a low RPM torque motor as opposed to some higher RPM stuff. And the reason that I posted that, the other reason I posted that is because I've gotten a lot of comments recently about L98 motors. Oddly enough, I'm getting a lot of questions from guys that are asking about, what kind of camshaft can I put in my L98 to make a rev? I'm like, well, as much as I'd like to tell you that you could put a really big camshaft in there, it's just not going to do it with that intake manifold. Even if you put ported heads and a camshaft in there with a factory runner length tune port manifold, it's just not going to want to rev. It's not going to want to make power past about 5,000 RPM. Maybe you could get to 5,500, but it's just not going to want to do that. But the interesting thing is when we, and there are a couple of things. I don't know if you guys can see the thumbnail still, or if you saw that before you got here. But the interesting thing is that one of the comments I always get when I'm on the dyno with any kind of turbo configuration, because you can see they're usually super richy fab together kind of things, and they're not really designed for vehicles. Occasionally, I will run an actual kit, especially back when I was doing stuff with my buddy Jimmy from HP Performance. He would send out actual kits of things that I could run. Like I had a 5-liter Ford one. I think I had a Dodge Ram one and a modular Ford one. So I've tested a few that actually fit. And this was one of them. This was an L98 tune port kit. And although it looks like it's really weird and a side hack kind of deal off to the side where the turbo mounting is, that was for a Corvette application, and the only place to put the turbo was over there off to the side under the windshield ledge. And I think we had to move something, either the battery or something that was over there, so that it would actually fit. But this was an application where we ran something that actually would go in the car. And honestly, between the stuff that fits in the vehicle and the stuff that I normally test, like if I test for instance, the LS motor, and the guys from Fowler, is that the name of them? I think Fowler. He's sending me out some stuff, so I'm going to use some of his stuff, some of his log style manifolds, which will be cool. But when we test something on the dyno and we run it with stock exhaust manifolds or shorty headers or whatever it is, and then I configure some sort of Y pipe and make it work, it's going to do the same thing as these ones that are dedicated for chassis fitment. There's going to be very little difference in if we use the same size turbo and the length and the run of tubing is a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, or even a little bit different in diameter. Because like, for instance, when I ran the Big Bang stuff on the first two Big Bang motors that I ran, the 4.8 and then the 5.3, and as a tangent, people get those mixed up all the time. I get quoted all the time if I'm responding in some group or whatever, and people say, yeah, Richard ran a 4.8 or ran a 5.3 or whatever, and it made 1,500 horsepower. I'm like, well, that's not entirely true. The one that made 1,500 was a 6.0, and then the one that made 1,482 was another 6.0, but it was a Gen 3, and then the 5.3 made 13.0 whatever, and then the 4.8 made 12.0 whatever, and so they're confusing all of them. But when I'm running what some of these turbo LS motors, for instance, I run stock exhaust manifolds feeding a Y pipe. If you did something different and configured it differently and ran that same turbo or those same turbos, it would do the same thing. There's very little change going to happen. And my point with the Big Bang, the reason I brought that up is because when I ran that, I configured my turbo kit, big air quotes there when you hear about it, was essentially shorty truck headers from JBA. So just basically tubular replacements for the factory exhaust manifolds, run with short sections of tubing that went from the ball socket of the shorty headers to the T4 turbo flange. One of them on one side was 3-inch and the other one was 2.5-inch. They were short run, so again, not going to be a big difference. But that's how much I didn't care about. I mean, we just made what we had to make with what we had. I didn't science out the kit, and yet still it did what all the Big Bang motors did, and made 1,300. That particular kit made 1,300 on the 5.3. And those were run like I know a 5.3 will make a lot more than that. I've seen other guys do it. We know, and they've been doing it for a long time. I would be curious to see if a 5.3 would actually do more than the 6.0 did. I don't think. The reason that I wanted to do a 6-liter, and I know I'm going off on all kinds of tangents here, but the reason that I wanted to do a 6-liter on the Big Bang stuff is because everyone was saying, there's this like little sliver of internet logic. Oh, well, the 5.3 has thicker sleeves and it has better head gasket sealing. And with a 6.0, if you try to run lots of power on them, you'll blow the head gasket because it doesn't, it's a bigger bore, so it has less meat between the cylinders, and so you'll blow head gaskets. Well, that didn't prove to be true, and the 6.0 has made more power than anything. And the nice thing is on a 6.0 that's making more NA power, as we all know because of the formula, you can run less boost to reach whatever power level we need to reach. So unless you build a really high RPM, super powerful 5.3, it just takes a lot more boost to get there. And I'm not saying you can't get there. I'm just saying that that's a reality. It takes a lot more. And I like the big numbers to come with lower boost levels, because in my opinion, both RPM and boost tend to create problems. So if I could have less of both of those, obviously you don't want to go to the extreme of less RPM, because then you have really big torque numbers, and that's also not good. But I'd rather run the motor at 6,500 or 7,000 than 8,000, and certainly more than I would like to run it at 6,500 than 5,500, because then we're going to be right near the torque peak and the horsepower peak are going to be really close to the same there. So we don't want to do that either, especially if we're trying to get a big number on a Big Bang deal. But on this TunePort deal, it was another one of these applications where we ran a turbo on it. And to illustrate the point that I always try to make with people, and I get this all the time with nitrous and centrifugal blowers or whatever, well, will this camshaft work? Will this combination work? Will this head work? Will this intake manifold work? And people need to stop looking at that. They just need to look at whatever they have. Whatever you have this modular power unit. And what does it do? Okay, you know what it does now. That's what it does when it's NA. Now we add boost to that. Now we add nitrous to that. Now we add a turbo or a blower, whatever it is. Start thinking about it like that. And I know that ultimately, if you're building a pro mod motor or something like that, you need to think differently. But for the vast majority of people that are asking these questions, they don't. They need to get off of the, well, will this intake to exhaust flow relationship work? Yes, it will. You don't have to tell me what it is. It will work. Well, will this camshaft work? Yes, unless it's a reverse pattern cam. It'll still work. It just won't work as good unless it's a 4-valve motor, apparently. And I do want to test that. I was talking to my buddy Jimmy, who has the Honda and will be on the dyno this week with his Acura, with his J-Series powered NSX, which again is just like 17 different kinds of awesome. And he's going to be doing a bunch of testing. We're going to be doing some videos on it. But in the 4-valve motors, they seem to run, you know, more intake duration and usually lift than they do exhaust. And I'd like to test it the other way to see what happens. Because I was looking through the comp cams while we were having a conversation. I was looking through the comp cams catalog for some of the modular Ford stuff, and on the blower specific, you know, the blower cams for the 4-valve modular Ford stuff, they do the reverse of that. They have more exhaust than they do intake. Is that because they're trying to get all that exhaust out from the blower? And if it works on a blower, why doesn't it work on other stuff? Why doesn't it make more power on other applications like all the other cams that we've tested? So again, I think there's a lot of cool stuff there. And I'm not saying it's always going to work, but if it does or it doesn't, whatever that is, I would definitely like to find out, because I do need to do more 4-valve testing. I did a fair bit back with the 4-valve 4.6 and 5.4 modular Ford stuff, but not to the extent that I did with swapping, you know, 15 or 20 or 30 different cams on an LS, because I can't do that on a 4-valve deal. For one, it's like $1,000 for each set of those cams, so that's really pretty. That's a pretty pricey deal, and obviously it's very time consuming and stuff too. But I would like to find out more information on how that works. Is that actually the way to go all the time? Like, what does it change? Because I know, like, for instance, when we do variable cam timing, like we did with the 4200 and we've done with a Coyote and stuff, and on the I think probably to a lesser extent on the Gen 5 LT motor, but when we do variable cam timing, what it wants for variable cam timing actually changes with boost. So I'm wondering if we'll see the same thing. Will we see that what camshaft the thing is responding to, will that change with different levels of boost pressure? Like for the average guy running 10 or 15 pounds or whatever, because the thing is, people talk about that like, oh, that's not very much boost. If you have a 550 horsepower Coyote motor, which is easily doable, and you have 15 pounds, you're already making way into the 4-digit power level. So that's a fairly serious amount. So I think less about it in terms of like, oh, that's, everybody runs 20, 30, 50, whatever the number of pounds of boost is. That's all great. But I look at it in terms of, for me, my mind works as the multiplier. Okay. You know, I have people ask me, like I had a guy ask me today, well, what if I ran, I have a 6-liter and I want to run a GT45 on it, and I want to run like 10 to 15 pounds. I'm like, well, 10 pounds, possibly, not 15. Because a cammed 6-liter with a GT45 is going to run out of turbo way before you get to whatever that double multiplier would be. Because any kind of cam 6-liter is going to be closer to 500 horsepower. And if you run 15 pounds of boost on a 500 horsepower motor, you're going to be out of GT45 turbo. And so that's how, when people talk to me, that's how my mind works. I don't think about, okay, this is the efficiency of that turbo and this is the cam and all of that. I just think, okay, it's this, and then it could be this. Wait a second. If it's going to be this, we need more of this like spinny thing up here. So that's how all that works. But the tune port thing, the reason that I posted that is because I liked running that tune port motor, although it was an eye-opening experience. Because, you know, when you're thinking about, I'd run lots and lots of other tune port combinations before that. And the tune port L98 motor, the modified L98 motor, because I think it had a cam in it too, was late to the game for my turbo applications. But it was amazing to see, because we had seen, you know, for LS stuff and all these things, we'd seen some fairly big power numbers on the LS. And the thing is, when you're going from, you know, 300 horsepower and you're running 7.5 pounds of boost, and you go up to 400 or 450, you're like, wow, that's really not very much power. And then you look over the torque and you're like, oh yeah, that's why that's happening. So that now 600 foot-pounds of torque makes more sense. We don't see the 600 horsepower because the tune port motor is skewed like this, lots of torque and not very much power. Lots of other motors are the same, where the horsepower and torque are the same, or some of them, if they're higher RPM deals, like for instance, a K-series Honda, would be skewed the other way. Lots of horsepower and not nearly as much torque, because the torque is nice and flat. So depending on which way you have that is, and then you add boost to that, it's still going to be that. So when we did the tune port stuff, we went, okay, now we got more horsepower, but we got a lot more torque. So it still kind of has the same shape stuff, as long as we have kind of a consistent boost curve. And that worked out exactly like that. But it took a little bit to get used to it, and we had to we had to adjust the dyno to get the thing to load down at the RPM where this thing wanted to run with the combination of torque that it needed to make. It was pretty impressive. But again, it was a learning experience for me trying to run that, because I don't know why I went into that thinking that, oh, hey, we're going to add a turbo to this, and now all of a sudden it's going to be this, it's going to be more like an LT motor, an LT1, like a second gen LT1, or a regular small block, or an LS. It's just not going to do that. It's going to be what it is. It's just going to be more of what it is. Instead of a 350-inch motor with a boost, now it's going to act like a 450 or 550-inch motor, but it's going to be the same thing. There's just going to be a lot more of it. Okay. So let's see what you guys got going on. Cadillac engines. Let's see. How much horsepower would you have with a cam 6-liter and a GT4 at 15 pounds of boost? I think did I just answer that? I think I did. You wouldn't be able to do that. You wouldn't get 15 pounds on a 6-liter. Aluminum block and intake, but cast iron heads. Who does that? But iron heads make more power, right? Olds best thing ever was a 3800 Series 2. Is that even an Oldsmobile motor, or is it a Pontiac? Turbo John has a real good small Chevy turbo car running no prep. His channel is pretty cool. It's easily, I mean, if you look at a small block Chevy, it has, because it's had literally decades of development, there are all kinds of, if you just look at Westech gets a lot of off-road trucks there, like trophy trucks and stuff. And so they run versions of small blocks, although they're running versions of big blocks now too. And not very many of those that were over there, the winning ones, were running LS powered. They're all running some sort of altered valve angle, big inch small block, or now a few of them have switched over to big blocks as well. And they're making a lot of power. I mean, the small blocks are probably 800 plus horsepower small blocks. And so there's no shortage. And if you look at a sprint car motor, I mean, or anything that they put a lot of effort into, you can make really, really big, serious numbers. And so the small block, you can do that with a turbo too. If you start off with a 500 horsepower small block, which is very easy, or a 550 or 600, wherever you want to start, depending on your displacement, there are all manner of cylinder heads and camshafts and intake manifolds available for them. Although I don't honestly think that there's anything for the small block that's as good as a Fast is for Cathedral Port LS. But there are good ones, and you can make a lot of power with them. So if you start off with a 500 or 550 horsepower small block Chevy, like a 383, and that would be a very normal number for that kind of thing, and then you add boost to it, you start multiplying that thing pretty fast, and they'll take lots of boost, and they'll make lots of power. So I don't think that the small block Chevy is I think you can certainly make lots and lots of power with it. And guys out there that are drag racing them, obviously, they can do that. Small block Chevy with a rising boost curve is a simple setup. No sense in making life hard on yourself. And lots of guys had run small block Chevys with blow-through carbureted applications, because basically that's what they had back in the day before the advent of all the fuel injection. The Nova is fine. Have you ever tested LS7 manifolds versus headers? Opinion on the difference. Are you talking about LS7 exhaust manifolds? If that's the question, then yes, I have, and long tube headers are always better than stock exhaust manifolds. I have not, however, run stock exhaust manifolds, the different factory LS stock exhaust manifolds. Like I haven't run LS7s, which I know are different, versus LS3s and trucks and Camaros and all that. I haven't ever compared those, because all of those are going to require also a different exhaust after the exhaust manifold, because a lot of them have different flanges. They have different outlet points. Some of them are aimed back. Some of them are in the center. The 3800 was a Buick. Okay. Ryan, does anybody know if the C8 LT2 and Camaro LT1 have the same block? I'm seeing LT2. I'm seeing the LT2 everywhere. Brian, 10 pounds. Well, I don't even know if you could run 10 pounds on it. The thing is that you're you're getting to the flow limit of that turbo. That turbo on a 6-liter is going to have that GT45 on a turbo is going to have a lot of back pressure. And that's the problem you're going to run into. So you can't get everything out of the compressor side, which we know on some of them we've made near 800 flywheel horsepower with on the right one. But we do that on a smaller motor because we don't have nearly as much back pressure. The bigger the motor that you put it on, you get to the flow limit of the hot side. So you can't do that. Turbos won't keep making an infinite amount of boost. They'll run out of flow, and then you'll get a falling boost curve. And then you'll also get a lot of back pressure, which also is not good. If you have a 6-liter, I would put a bigger turbo on it unless you're only ever going to run like 7 pounds on that thing. Jeff, Sparky done. 190 horsepower small block with 15 pounds of boost. Would that work? It will work, but it's not going to make very much power. Justin, personal opinion, stroked 5.3 with a Whipple or stroked NA 4.2 and why? Trying to decide for myself. In terms of power, a Whipple supercharged 5.3 will make a lot more power than an NA motor will. So if you have to decide, is power your thing? If power is your thing, then a power adder combination is going to make a lot more than an NA 6.2 will. It will take almost no boost at all to get a cammed 5.3. It says a stroked one. I'm assuming that that's going to be like a 383 or something. The 383 is going to make really close to the, if you did a 6.2, that would be a 417. Even a 417 is going to be like, you know, most of them are around mid 600s. And so a supercharged, especially a stroke supercharged 5.3 should be way over that. A centrifugal supercharged small block Chevy is a good compromise. I've run Vortec blowers and ProCharger blowers on lots of small blocks, and they work really good. Can you go more into the formula of balanced power and what efficient boost numbers look like? I maybe don't understand the question. You should, what I can say is you should try to make whatever NA power you have, then you add boost to that. It just multiplies whatever is there. So it doesn't matter what's there. Whatever is there, like the tune port motor, lots of torque, not nearly as much horsepower. When we add boost to that, it stays like that. It still has lots of torque, especially we're going to have boost down there because we have lots of torque. So it's just going to elevate everything that's there. So if you have a motor that has lots of torque and very little horsepower, like the tune port, it's still going to have that. If you have one that makes like 400 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds, that's a typical kind of small block combination. It's still going to do that. It's just going to, everything is going to be elevated. Now at 7 pounds, you're going to have 600 horsepower and 600 foot-pounds. Or if you have one like a K series, like I was talking about, that makes like ours made 300 horsepower NA, but only makes 200 foot-pounds, let's say. I don't remember what the torque was, but let's say that that's what it was. 200 foot-pounds. And so you have a big difference between the amount of torque that it made and the amount of horsepower. That stays the same. When you add boost to that, the horsepower number goes way up and the torque number just elevates from whatever it was. If you put 18 or 15 degree heads on a Gen 1 small block, they can run with any LS. Yeah, if you're here and you're asking questions, and even if you're new or whatever, you just ask the question. We will answer it. There's lots of good information here. Not just all from me. You'll get some information from me. You'll get lots from other guys that are here too. Richard, have you heard anyone running Darton mid sleeves on LS1, LS6s? I ran, they said you can get a 4125 bore out of the block without hurting the strength. I ran Darton sleeves on an LS6 block, and I made a 468 out of it. And I might do a video on it. And then when we did the 495, I went to the RHS tall deck block. But the 468 worked out really good. I don't think I went to 4125. I actually went farther than 4125. I ran a 4185 bore on it. So you could go, the ones that I ran, I thought that they told me you could go to 4200 on that. So is it fair to say older engines can still make power? Every engine can if you apply yourself. I was just talking to Brule, and he was telling me about, let's see if I have the data here. He was telling me about a Y block that a guy was running. on the dyno, and it was making really big power. I mean, for a Y block, it was making really big power, and I can't find the data on there now. I wrote it down because I wanted to do a video on it. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it made 655 horsepower, and it was a Y block, and the car was running 960s at 138, with a Y block. So you can make lots of power if you apply yourself to just about anything. Would you ever do a test of gas versus methanol? Yeah, I plan to do that with Brian Tooley because we were talking about that. He recently did a methanol versus E85 test, and he picked up about 30 or 35 horsepower on the LT motor that he tested it on. Don, my friend Ken Shaver, maybe, won the stock eliminator India in 1987. 307 All-American car, 87 Olds Cutlass. Nice. He pulled the wheels off the ground. Very cool. Looking into the CHE trunnion kit. Anyone have them? I've never tried the CHE stuff, but it's probably good, though. Bronze bushing seems better than the needle bearings with C-clips. Okay, if you already have a 6.2, if you use what you have, but run boost on the 6.2. What if all you have is a Chevy 307? Doesn't matter. Look at what we did with the 305. You can make power with that. There's heads for that. There's cams. There's intakes. There's boost for that if you can't get what you need to get with the heads, cam, and intake. It would be cool to see a V8 with an undersized turbo and peak boost at 2,500, the way modern turbo cars are set. You can get a turbo to do that. I don't know why you want all of that torque at 2,500, but you can. Which one made more max and average power, the BTR 454 or the Caddy 500? My Cadillac 500 only made 400 horsepower or 380 or 90 horsepower. So that's not a comparison. I think I can't remember now, the aluminum headed deal that Cadco did made a pretty fair bit of power, but I don't remember how much it was. The Turbo 307 Olds movement is gaining strength. Are there several people now involved in it? Ken Shaver also had the fastest super stock Trans Am back in the late 90s of the 455. I do want to build a Pontiac. JB, I have a set of 2015 Z28 LS7 exhaust. Did they put an LS7 in the Z28? Was that in the? Oh, that was in the Z28. That's right. Okay, exhaust manifolds. If you want them, there's supposed to be some kind of tri-wide mid-length. I don't know if I've seen the ones that are in the Camaro. I think I've only seen the ones that were in the Corvettes, or ones that came on the crate motors. Ron, are my 310 race AFR heads too small for my 421 small block? I'm assuming that that's a 210 race head, and no, it's not too small for that combination. Would you recommend a 1-to-1 boost to back pressure for turbo seal longevity? No, very rarely are you going to get that. Katie, I think the 307 will do well with boost. My little 305 is ridiculous. Anything that you put boost on is going to multiply whatever is there. It doesn't care that, oh, that's not a popular engine, or that has a bore that's too small, or or that if you're one of the other internet guys, that it has too short or too long of a rod or whatever. It doesn't care about any of that. It just cares about how big of a turbo am I and how much power it does the NA motor make, and then now how much boost are you going to run? And see, so here's Bob Hill. My 69 El Camino had a 307. Immediately removed it for a big block. Okay, that's a good choice. Now I want to keep the 307 in my 70 GMC C15 and build around it. See, I think the cool thing is I know that it makes sense to, if you have a 305 and you want to make more power, you take the 305 out and put a 350 in. There are more heads available for it. It's just a good choice. But it's a lot cooler to be able to say, yeah, I just went 950s in a 305. If you say you did it in a 350, everyone's like, yeah, that's great. People have been doing that since the 60s. But if you did it in a 305, that just adds that whole another level of coolness. Now, that whole another level of coolness is going to cost you in time and money and aggravation, but that's what makes it cool, right? Oh yeah, what's tonight's poll? I forgot about that. Okay, well, we'll get that going. Can the small block Chevy still compete with the LS? Can the small block Chevy still compete? Let's get the spelling correctly there. Hard to believe that you were a journalist. Can the small block Chevy still compete with the LS? Boom. Get that going. Richard, what's a good camshaft for an 11-to-1, 363 small block Ford AFR 220s and a VS 7875, 1200 to 1300 horsepower? 7875 is probably not going to make 1300. I don't think it's a big enough turbo. If you had two of them, you could do that, but I don't think that 78 is going to do that. A 7875 is probably more like, it's closer to 1,000 horsepower turbo, maybe an 1,100 horsepower turbo. So no amount of motor, I think, is going to help you get there. You're going to have to step up to something bigger, I think. You might talk to Byron. I think he'll tell you that too. But for a camshaft, you could put almost anything in there. Something like on that 363, if you put even something like that XFI 236 cam, which is a 236 248, it's a good camshaft. It'll make pretty good power in that 363. We've run bigger camshafts than that for NA deals that made, 550 or 560 or whatever, but you don't need that for a turbo application. That 236 248, you could even run something smaller than that. I'll bet you if you put that Extreme Energy 274 cam in a 363, although 11-to-1, I might want to go with a bigger turbo than that just to help it with detonation. But if that 236 cam, if you put that in there, that will work. And then you put the right size turbo on it to get to 1,300 horsepower. You're going to have an S480 or something like that to make that work. Richard, thinking of picking up a Geo Metro in 1990. Nice, 850. The one that I like is the XFI, but they're really hard to find because those are the high mileage ones. But any of them will get good mileage, and 850 bucks, as long as you don't have to fix a bunch of stuff on it, and you could put a turbo on it. Can you discuss CFM flow versus boost, air volume versus air restriction? I don't know what discussion you're asking about. I don't think about boosted applications in terms of that. Like, I don't care about what the head flow is versus the boost. I don't care about any of that. I care about what the NA power output is and then what boost you want to run, and that will tell you what the eventual power output is. It doesn't really matter what the head flow is. Need information on the infamous Mopar 400. I agree. I'd like to. I mean, the 440, although the Mopar stuff is not nearly as prevalent and visible as small block Chevys and LSs and all that stuff. But even within the Mopar stuff, the 440 would be more, like the 318 and the 340 and maybe the 360. The 318 seems to be the darling, and I don't really understand because it just makes less power than a 360 everywhere. But I digress. But the 440 would kind of be the go-to big block for most guys because you'll find those in motorhomes and stuff. But a 400 and a 383, not nearly as much. Man, I can't wait to turbo on my Boss 260. That will be a fun one. I really like those intake manifolds. Yeah, your Metro should be a 3-cylinder. It should be a 1 liter. You can run a pretty small turbo on that. Yeah, T25. That's probably sized about right. Betty White Racing, totally off subject, but what turbine aero would you recommend for a Mazda 13B REW rotary that has a goal of 800 to 1,000 wheel horsepower on methanol? Also, motors backed up to a C4. Wow. First induction 88, 96, 125. Didn't you already tell me that you have a 125 AR on it? I think on a 13B rotary, you can have a tighter AR. Honda D series gang. Team D. So did you revise your? Yeah. So the camshaft that I told you about is this will easily make 1,000 horsepower. And I'm not I haven't never run a rotary on the engine dyno. It's hard for me to say what's going to work. And the 88 seems like a lot of turbo for a rotary, but maybe not. Maybe Rob might know. Is there an optimum boost to back pressure ratio? No, there's not one number that's better. Like for our Bonneville car, we had less back pressure than boost pressure, but because we didn't care at all about boost response. We had a fairly big turbo. We had a 72 millimeter turbo on a sub 2 liter B series Honda, but I didn't care when it went into boost. All we cared about is that we had boost and that the boost curve was fairly flat in the RPM range that we were running it in 4th and 5th gear. I didn't care about any of the other ones because we were only at part throttle in those. We were only at part throttle all the way through until the top of 4th gear. And then we had to go from the top of 4th gear, shift into 5th. And then 5th was a fairly big drop, which it would have been better if it wasn't, if I had a different trans. But we just used an Integra LS trans with a custom final drive that we did. But it didn't matter to me that we didn't have boost at 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000. I don't think we had boost until after VTEC. But and we had less back pressure than boost pressure, but we made a lot of power relative to the boost level that we were running on the combination, and it worked very well. For the street, you're not going to want that. Like that car would have been terrible to drive around, especially with a 4.0 final drive. It would have been, and a 26-inch tall tire would have been terrible to drive around because it wouldn't have been very responsive. So the turbo that I would have used for that would have been much smaller than that and would have had more back pressure. So if you have something like most of the factory stuff could be easily 2 to 1. And if you turn them up, they can get into the 3 to 1 range. Is it better to keep or remove variable valve timing in your LS2 if you don't care about gas mileage? Like, will it keep stress off the motor to make it last longer? The variable valve timing is not going to change the longevity of the motor. And your LS2 shouldn't have variable valve timing on it because that factory LS2 didn't come that way. Maybe it's a different one. It would be in a truck or something, or if it's in or if it's an LS3 based one, like an L92 or something. Choosing who to seed and see port heads. What heads are you having ported? Ooh, a B series Honda swap in a Metro would be really good. Is there a kit to put a 4.3 in a Geo? Rule of thumb for CFM to horsepower is 0.25. Yeah, for V8s we do. What do we do? So So we do two. The potential is a good rule of thumb is 2 horsepower per peak CFM of the head flow. Now that's very hard to do. We just use that as a gauge. Or it takes, what does it take? 2. Yeah. Yeah, 2. How well do the Vortex heads handle boost? Is it worth sticking with factory Vortex or just ponying up the cash and buy an aluminum head would be less susceptible to detonation. And if you get an aftermarket aluminum head, chances are it's going to flow more than a factory Vortex head does. That being said, again, if you just look at it in terms of power, if you take a Vortex head and do what you need to do with the springs and stuff and put the right camshaft in it, and you make, let's say, 400 horsepower, which is possible with a small block of Vortex head and small block, and then you add boost to that, all of a sudden at 15 pounds, you're at 800 horsepower. So it depends on how much power you want and where you're starting with and where you want to go to, all of that. Elite Events didn't have a Metro, but had a GTI Swift Cultus on an 80 shot. So you had the big block in there in a GTI Swift. That would have been a 1.3, right? And that would have been a twin cam motor. Got my first trophy in a 15.0 class. Nice. Vortex with a pocket port work really well. Have you done any tests with CHI Cleveland heads? Yes, I have. I ran a Cleavor 408, I think, way back, and I also ran CHI heads on the Boss 302 way back. Somebody was asking about an intercooler test, and then all of a sudden I got lost here. Man, how did it go? Wow, am I like way behind? I must be way behind here. Okay, I'm gonna have to zoom down because apparently I'm way behind for all you guys. So where are we at on our poll here? Oh, so can the small block Chevy still compete with the LS? We're at 73% saying yes and 27% saying no with 175 votes. But we have 279 people here, so people get in there and vote. Get into the poll, man. Get into the poll position. You like that? You like how I did that? Can the small block Chevy compete with the LS? Come on, guys, get in there and answer. Yeah, you always tend to get my 67 Camaro weighed 3,000 pounds, had a 305 HO. Nice. I'm way behind. Micro had 2 former, one for the engine, one for extensions. He uses a trans control. What's the small block horsepower record? I don't know that anybody has that. Got to put 305 heads on your TPI 350. I'm trying to scroll back and see if I missed any of the questions. Okay, we'll scroll back down. Let's see. Supercharged 350. Also, I think a 471 is good. I don't remember the last time I saw a 471. Those are kind of small and compact. Seen a video of a dyno run with a stock 305 and nitrous over 500 horsepower. That'd be hard to do on a stock one. Tyler, how much would it cost to make 1,000 horsepower out of a small block? Now let's talk. I think if you started with an L31 and put springs and cam in it and then boosted it, I don't know. I think it could do the same thing that the 1,000 horsepower LS does. Jason, thanks for hosting these. Question is a turbo with a T56 a recipe for frustration with autocross, building a first-gen Camaro with TCI front and rear, and we'll be keeping manual trans. I think I would rather have a, I don't know how long the straightaways are on your autocross, but I think I would rather have an NA motor or maybe even a positive displacement blower for that. But you can have a small enough turbo where the thing is pretty responsive. Excuse me, you just have to drive it differently. A Miata is definitely a good choice for autocross. They handle really nice. They're really fun on road courses. What is the best manual trans to put in a 2004 Chevy Suburban with an LQ4 and four-wheel drive? Somebody might answer that. I'm the wrong guy. Santos small block Chevy drags are made over 3,000 horse. See, it's certainly possible to make lots of power. LS2 with centrifugal, 9 to 10 pounds of boost. Fuel is 94 octane and meth injection. 17 degrees peak timing. Is that too conservative? An LS2, 94. I would run more than that at 10 pounds, as long as I knew that the meth injection was doing its part. Three boys. What is a 400 small block, 511 block, max horsepower capable when the block is filled? I don't know how to answer that because I've never run a 400 small block on any. I mean, we've run some of them on the engine dyno, but never for like maximum output. If you have all forged internals and dart head, then the block is probably going to be the limiting thing. But I don't know where that is. There is absolute. That's a good point. Another thing to mention is that you can get some really nice small block Chevy stuff on the secondhand market. There's lots of stuff there, and there's I think you can still buy cup stuff, used cup stuff. Any experience with a Rodec aluminum small block? I've seen them at West Tech. I've never run one though. Will you do a big bang 305? Probably not. I do want to do a big bang like an L31. Santos didn't even have to swap the pistons. Did he have offset pins? Did he have the short connecting rods and just all of that? Supercharged 350 blowers definitely sound better, but I was pricing out a Dyer's kit and it was $3,500. That's nice. Does GM offer a big aluminum LS block? Do they have an aftermarket aluminum block? I know they have the LSX stuff, but that's all iron, right? Some small blocks came with 100 horsepower at the tire. Probably they did. Probably the 267s and the 262s and stuff, like the Monza motors, they probably made about that. Some of them were only rated at 130 or 140 horsepower at the flywheel. Chuck, Richard, maybe a little off topic, but what's your opinion of using something like DynoSim 6 to try out combinations? How does it compare to actual dyno results? Is that a dyno simulator or something like that? I'm going to push 25-ish through my 421. 25 pounds on anything should be a lot. Can a 383 be built for high mileage, like for fuel mileage? If I was doing fuel mileage, I definitely wouldn't do a 383. Brad, sorry I'm late. My wife sent me to the store for dinner, but I came back with a case of 394 Pale Ale, so I'm in a good place. Nice. For short to medium stroke, small block Chevy will always be a contender thanks to cheap iron or 4125 bore iron blocks. But I don't. Do we really find? I don't know how many. Honestly, I don't know how many I've looked for. But do we even find 400 small blocks in the wrecking yard anymore? A splayed valve small block Chevy will outdo any LS. I don't usually like to word the use any and all and that kind of stuff, because then somebody steps up with something that's not the case on. Oh, a dyno simulator. Okay. The problem with dyno simulators is they never tell you what the whole curve looks like accurately, in my opinion. And and not that they can't, but the problem is that it's hard to have all of the information that you have to have. Like, I don't know what the flow lift is at every valve lift for every cylinder head that I run. And I might not know exactly what the chamber size is or the port volume or the other things that would be very important for a dyno simulator to try to speculate on what the power looks like at any one point, let alone the whole curve. But I think that they should show you pretty accurately what trends are, though, which is kind of what we're interested in. Stock bottom end 8.1 Gen 7 big block 1,000 horsepower. I don't know. I've never even seen one. I may have seen one that was at West Tech when the guys from Raylar were there, but other than that, I've never seen one in the wild. A GTX 42 is a pretty good player. Yeah, no way you're finding 400 small blocks in the wrecking yard. I didn't think so. I haven't really searched around for that. I would be looking at trucks and stuff. And like, I'm not going to find a early 70s station wagon in the wrecking yard, I don't think, anymore. So you want to do a 383 for high mile per gallon? You'd want to make a smaller motor than that if you're trying to get fuel mileage. Elite, I doubt anyone will say the LS isn't better, but if you realistically want 400, 500, 600, and you already have a small block Chevy, my point is build what you have. It would be easier and less expensive usually to do that if you already have the motor in there. It's hooked to the trans, it's already bolted in. All of your things are working with a small block. You can make that kind of power. If that's the power that you want, and you add a turbo to that, it's just as easy to do that as it is to do it on an LS. Snafu, I didn't see your shirt idea, so I don't know what you're talking about. The current NASCAR Chevy engine is at least as far away from the small block Chevy as the LS. Yeah, we have a couple of, well, the guys from West Tech have a couple of not current ones, not like this year or last year or whatever, but they're, 6 or 8 years old, whatever. And even those are not, that's not a small block. I don't know that any of those parts interchange with an actual small block. Can I boost an old dark cast iron heads on an E85? Yes. I used to like when I could keep up reading the messages. Now it's not so much. There are a lot of, well, there's a lot of people here. There's 277 people here. So let's see how many we got going on with the polls. Everybody get on the poll. Oh, we got 263 votes. So we're doing good. It's still staying pretty constant. Can the small block Chevy still compete with the LS? 73% said yes. So we got lots of small block Chevy love tonight. Is that the crazy dude getting some spectacles? No, but I am thinking about changing it though. Somebody else mentioned the fact that I needed to have a cam in my hand, and when I first saw it, I thought that I needed something else in my hand, and I kind of would like to change the turbo a little bit. It has what I think is an oil line coming off of it, and maybe the guy that did it, the picture that he found had an oil line or something on it. It looks like one of those electric turbos, and I don't want it to look like that. I want it to look like a turbo, but I should at least have a camshaft so that they could be wrong cam kind of thing, right? What's the go-to EFI setup for a turbo small block that hasn't already been discussed? I run fast and Holly on it because we just use a distributor, but there are lots of stuff out there. Let's see. Her new logo thing needs to make you look a little meaner. That's not me. You can get kidney style heads for the small block Chevy. With the carb swap, the LS is a good option for an old car to make easy NA power. It is. If you get a 5.3 and put a carburetor on it, like a junkyard 5.3, and put a carburetor on it with the MSD or Edelbrock ignition controller, and run that, it actually does pretty well. It's right out of the box, just all stock, even with a stock camshaft. It's going to be about a 350 horsepower motor, so it's going to do pretty well. And then if you put a cam in it, then it's a lot more than that. Did you guys ever catch up with HP Monster? I have, and he's a good guy. He used to be a magazine guy, so he does some really good stuff over there. Single plane port EFI, any ECM you want, they all do the same thing. Yeah, that would work fine. Don't forget the 5XL shirts. I'll have to see about that. I'm sure that they make that, right? Test a Holly sniper on a small block and an LS. Which sniper are you talking about? Is it the intake manifold? Is it the EFI? Is it the throttle body injection? Is it the air cleaner? Is it the valve cover? What is it that you're talking about? They use that name on everything. Yeah, Kyle, if you're finding $500 6-liter LS motors, please let me know. I'd like about 5 or 6 of them. 600 horsepower on a 400 small block Chevy running at Eldora all day long. That's a lot. Dart LS next, or do I absolutely have to go with an iron block, assuming I only want 1200? If I was trying to do 1200 horsepower, I think I might use a stock one. Doug, happy to have you back. KD, you're going to be stress testing the 400 block with compounds. Why do you need compounds with a 400? Yeah, if there's anyone good that has a design background or whatever, and you want to design a logo, let me know. I will definitely pay for that. I got this one off of Fiverr. John, aftermarket small block Chevy heads with the same flow numbers as stock LS heads, would they both make the same power for the most part? One thing a small block Chevy does not have is it does not have as good an intake manifold as the LS has. There's no small block Chevy equivalent of a fast manifold. So you'd have to run them both with, for the LS, effectively substandard manifolds in the case of a single plane intake manifold, which is what most guys would probably want to run on a small block. And the small block, even if it has the same flow, it's not going to have the same port length and dimension and probably valve size and chamber. So I don't know that they would, even given the head, if you could get them to flow exactly the same in all the different lifts. I don't know if you could, but if you could, I don't know if it would make the same power. Dell, can you build me a 427 alloy small block Chevy with SP2 heads, good for 98 octane, pump 900 horsepower, and send it to Australia? I couldn't do that because I've never done that before. A 900 horsepower 427 would be a lot. That's a fairly high specific output. 900 divided by 427, that's more than 2, right? Yeah, 2.1. That takes a lot. The local U pool, it's our 150, and they have plenty of LSs, even 6 liters. I don't know where they have 6 liters that are $150. Richard, do you have an aftermarket small but Chevy block? I do not. Is 1 horsepower per cubic inch underselling myself for a small block 350? No, that's actually pretty easy. A wheel dyno lies to you? I was just talking to somebody about wheel dynos today because they were telling me that, oh, have you ever seen those hub dynos? I said, yeah, I've seen hub dynos. I've seen all of the different kinds of chassis dynos. I'm told that those are a lot more accurate. I'm like, more accurate than what? They don't have wheels and tires on them, so they're not taking that into account. So what are they more accurate than? Are they more accurate than a dyno jet or a loaded dyno jet or a superflow or a loaded superflow or land and sea or whatever the other kinds of dynos are? I'm like, look, if you're testing something on a dyno and you have a baseline and it repeats and then you make a change and you saw what the change did, I said, that's accurate. I don't care about what, if you want to compare that number from that dyno to a number from another dyno, I don't do that. I look at delta changes on stuff. That's what I care about. I am planning on doing collaborations with Eric. I'm sending him the V6s. In fact, he might be coming out to, he said he might be coming out to West Tech this week. Yeah. The chassis dynos, if you change the tire pressure, it will definitely change the power output. I've done that a few times. The hub dyno has no wheel spin. That's definitely a benefit for that. Two more minutes. I used to test Cup car engines. We calibrate our dynos beforehand. The Cup teams would complain our numbers were too low. We'd multiply by 1.15 to make them happy. And that's the thing. If it makes a certain number on the engine dyno and they put it in, and it makes a low number on the chassis dyno, but yet it still goes out and runs the number when they're on the track, are you really losing something? Okay, guys, thank you all for showing up. Let's see what happened. We're going to end our poll here. Stayed pretty consistent. 313 votes, guys. Thanks for jumping in and voting. Can the small block Chevy still compete with the LS? Seems to be 71% saying yes and only 29% saying no. So that was a good poll. We'll have to come up with some ideas for polls. You guys should chime in there. I'm also working on the Patreon stuff, so I'm hoping that 2022 is going to have lots of cool stuff, like with T-shirts and the Patreon account and all, and more merchandise and stickers and all kinds of stuff. But I want to make sure that the more I'm looking at this logo, the more I want to at least change a couple of things with it. So I want it to be better. Like I said, at least want it to have a cam and a turbo, because that's what it's all about. Cam. I guess we need to have springs too. Cam, springs, and turbo, except I only have two hands. I can only hold two of those things. So thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you guys all tomorrow.